On the 12th night of the London season in the spring of 1818, a wager was made that would ruin a duke far more thoroughly than any scandal, debt, or political enemy ever could. The men who heard it laughed. The women who eventually learned of it whispered. And the man who spoke the words believed them completely. At the time, Nathaniel Blackthorne, Duke of Westhaven, stood before the fireplace of Whitehall Club with all the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle worth remembering. The firelight cast warm gold across the dark wood panels of the room. Crystal glasses reflected amber light. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking St. James's Street, while inside, London's most privileged gentlemen occupied leather chairs and discussed everything from Parliament to horse breeding. Nathaniel leaned one shoulder against the mantel. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black evening coat, he looked every inch the powerful aristocrat society believed him to be. At 33, he possessed an ancient title, a formidable fortune, and the sort of controlled reserve that made ambitious mothers dream of becoming his mother-in-law and made their daughter spend entire evenings attempting to attract his attention. Usually without success. "You have been staring into your glass for 10 minutes, Julian Ashcroft observed from across the room. "Either the brandy is exceptionally fascinating tonight, or something else occupies your thoughts." Nathaniel glanced up. "Nothing occupies my thoughts." A collective groan rose from the group gathered nearby. "There it is," said Theodore Ravenshire. "The most predictable lie in England." Laughter followed. Nathaniel merely raised an eyebrow. His expression remained unchanged. "I am not lying." "You are." Theodore pointed his glass toward him. "You disappeared halfway through Lady Whitmore's ball 3 nights ago. You ignored 3 duchesses, 2 countesses, and whatever number of determined débutantes were presented to you. Then you spent nearly half an hour speaking with Miss Fairchild in the conservatory." Nathaniel took a measured sip of brandy. "I was discussing horticulture." The room erupted again. "Horticulture?" Julian nearly choked on his drink. "Good God! What was she growing?" another gentleman asked. "An army? A revolution? Your future children." More laughter followed. Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That only encouraged them further. Men who had known him for years recognized the rare signs of irritation. "Miss Fairchild has become rather popular lately," Theodore continued. "Which is remarkable considering society spent years pretending she did not exist. Society often behaves foolishly." Nathaniel set down his glass. "On that point we agree." The response drew several curious looks. Theodore leaned forward. "Interesting." "What is?" "You defended her." Nathaniel frowned. "I stated a fact." "You rarely bother stating facts unless you care about the subject." A brief silence settled over the group. Nathaniel knew exactly what they were doing. They smelled amusement. Worse, they smelled vulnerability. Not that he intended to give them any. Across countless seasons, he had cultivated a reputation for discipline. No scandals. No reckless affairs. No dramatic entanglements. Other men allowed themselves to become captives of infatuation. Nathaniel preferred control. It was simpler. Safer. Far more efficient. Then someone said her name again. "Rosalind Fairchild." Theodore smiled slowly. "There is something about her, is there not?" Nathaniel looked toward the rain-streaked windows. For a fleeting moment, an image surfaced uninvited. Intelligent grey eyes. Calm composure. A voice that never rose simply to command attention because it never needed to. Miss Rosalind Fairchild occupied an unusual position in London society. At 27, she was neither a celebrated beauty nor a fashionable scandal. Her younger sisters had married advantageously years earlier. Meanwhile, Rosalind remained unmarried, quietly managing her widowed mother's household while attending social functions with the graceful resignation of someone who expected very little from them. Yet she possessed a quality that was difficult to ignore once noticed. She listened. Truly listened. Most conversations at London gatherings felt like elaborate performances. Speaking with Rosalind felt different. Nathaniel disliked realizing that. "You are all behaving like children," he finally said. Theodore grinned. "Then answer the question." "What question?" "Do you admire her?" Nathaniel almost laughed. Instead, he folded his arms. "I respect her intelligence." A chorus of triumphant sounds erupted around him. That is practically a declaration of love coming from West Haven. Someone alert the newspapers. The Duke is human after all. Nathaniel rolled his eyes. Enough. Theodore stood and crossed toward the fireplace. "You realize this changes everything." "Nothing has changed." "Of course it has." Theodore's smile widened. The man who rejects every woman in London has finally noticed one. Nathaniel met his gaze directly. "You misunderstand." "Do I?" "Entirely." Theodore spread his hands. "Then enlighten us." Nathaniel should have ignored him. In retrospect, he would remember that moment many times. He would remember the crackling fire, the smell of cigar smoke, the rain against the glass. Most of all, he would remember how easy the words felt when they first left his mouth. "Very well." The room quieted. "Miss Fairchild is intelligent. She is sensible. She possesses more character than half the people currently attending London's social season." Several gentlemen exchanged surprised glances. Nathaniel continued. "None of that means I am in danger of falling in love." Theodore's eyes gleamed. "Danger? You know precisely what I mean." "Do I?" "I am not one of those men who lose all reason because a woman smiles at them." Theodore folded his arms. "You sound remarkably confident." Nathaniel allowed himself the faintest smile. "Because I am." "How confident?" asked Julian. A dangerous note entered the conversation. The kind that often preceded regrettable decisions. Theodore noticed it immediately. "Yes, West Haven." He tilted his head. "How confident?" Nathaniel looked around the room. Every face reflected anticipation. Perhaps he should have walked away. Instead, pride intervened. Confident enough to spend an entire season in Miss Fairchild's company without developing any romantic attachment whatsoever. A few whistles sounded. Theodore laughed. "That is a bold claim." "It is a simple truth." "Even if she encouraged your attention." Nathaniel shrugged. "It would change nothing." "Even if society began pairing your names together." "Nothing." Theodore's grin sharpened. "Even if she became the most sought-after woman in London." "Still nothing." "You are absolutely certain?" Nathaniel met his gaze without hesitation. "Completely." Theodore extended his hand. "Then let us make it interesting." Several gentlemen immediately leaned closer. Nathaniel recognized the expression on Theodore's face. Trouble disguised as entertainment. "A wager?" Julian asked. "A wager," Theodore agreed. Nathaniel sighed. "You are ridiculous." "Probably." Theodore remained unmoved. "But are you willing?" Nathaniel should have declined. Instead, the challenge appealed to the part of him that had always trusted discipline above emotion. "What are the terms?" Theodore's smile became victorious. "You spend the season exactly as circumstances allow. Attend gatherings. Dance if necessary. Converse if opportunity presents itself." Nathaniel already disliked where this was going. And if by the end of the season you remain entirely unaffected, I will donate £500 to the Veterans Hospital you support. Several approving murmurs followed. Nathaniel considered. "And if I lose?" Theodore's grin became almost predatory. "You publicly admit that for once in your life, your heart proved stronger than your pride." Laughter filled the room. Nathaniel shook his head. "Impossible." "Then you have nothing to fear." Another pause followed. The challenge hung between them. Finally Nathaniel clasped Theodore's hand. "Done." Cheers erupted immediately. Someone called for another round of drinks. Another demanded witnesses. The matter became official within moments. Nathaniel merely returned to his chair. The entire affair seemed absurd, yet somehow satisfying. He had ended the discussion. Or so he believed. None of the gentlemen noticed the figure passing slowly beyond the club's partially open doorway. A woman dressed in deep violet silk paused just long enough to hear the final exchange. She had arrived earlier than expected to meet her brother, who was finishing business nearby. She had not intended to overhear anything. Yet certain words carried surprisingly well. Entire season. Miss Fairchild. Unaffected. Wager. The woman continued down the corridor without revealing herself. By the following afternoon, fragments of the conversation would begin spreading through drawing rooms and parlors across Mayfair. Not enough to become open gossip. Not yet. But enough to start moving quietly through London's invisible channels. And eventually, inevitably, those whispers would find their way to Rosalind Fairchild. Unaware of any of this, Rosalind sat beside a tall bay window in her family's townhouse on Berkeley Square as pale morning sunlight spilled across her embroidery frame. Her mother reviewed correspondence nearby. The room smelled faintly of tea roses and freshly brewed tea. Outside, carriage wheels rattled along the street. Inside, peace reigned. For the moment. Rosalind threaded her needle carefully. She had always appreciated quiet mornings. Society demanded performance. Mornings allowed honesty. "You are thinking again," her mother observed. Rosalind smiled faintly. "Is that a criticism?" "Only when accompanied by that particular expression." "Which expression?" "The one suggesting you are solving problems no one else has noticed." Rosalind laughed softly. "Then I shall attempt to look less intelligent." "Please do not. We have survived this long because you refuse to be less intelligent." The response warmed her more than the sunlight. She lowered her gaze back to her embroidery. Outside, London continued its endless motion. Somewhere beyond those streets, a duke sat entirely unaware that the first crack had already appeared in the carefully controlled world he believed unshakable. And somewhere between Mayfair ballrooms, whispered conversations, and a wager made beside a fire, fate had already begun moving its pieces into place. The season had only just begun. The game had already started. And before 14 days had passed, one of the proudest men in England would discover that some defeats felt remarkably like destiny. By the end of the week, Rosalind Fairchild had become the subject of a rumor she had never requested and could not entirely escape. It arrived the way most dangerous things arrived in London society. Quietly. Respectably. Wrapped in silk gloves and pleasant smiles. The first hint came during a luncheon hosted by Lady Winthrop in Grosvenor Square. Rosalind attended only because declining would have offended 3 different hostesses and likely generated more discussion than her presence ever could. Such was the peculiar logic of the ton. At 27, she had mastered the art of navigating those invisible rules. She sat midway down a polished mahogany table adorned with white roses and silver candelabras while conversations drifted between fashion, travel, and the latest engagements. Across from her, Lady Amelia Thornton was describing a disastrous carriage journey through Surrey when the woman seated beside Rosalind suddenly leaned closer. "Have you seen the Duke of Westhaven lately?" Rosalind glanced up. "I cannot say that I have." "How fortunate." The woman lowered her voice. "Half of London appears determined to discuss him." Rosalind smiled politely. "That hardly seems unusual." "Perhaps not. But this time the conversation is rather specific." Something in the woman's tone caused several others nearby to exchange knowing looks. Rosalind felt a small flicker of unease. "I see." "Do you?" the woman replied. "Because your name is involved." Silence settled around their section of the table. Not complete silence. Merely the sort that occurred when people suddenly found one topic far more interesting than every other. Rosalind carefully placed her teacup onto its saucer. "My name." Only indirectly. Another lady joined in. "At least for now." Rosalind recognized the warning immediately. Social predators often enjoyed circling their prey before striking. How mysterious. Not mysterious at all. Lady Amelia looked almost apologetic. There was apparently a conversation at Whitehall Club. Rosalind felt her stomach tighten slightly. Indeed. A harmless discussion among gentlemen. Which means it is probably neither harmless nor sensible, another woman observed. Several laughed. Rosalind maintained her composure. Years of society had taught her that curiosity often provided more entertainment to observers than answers ever could. What was discussed? She asked. Lady Amelia hesitated. You. The room seemed to narrow for a moment. Not dramatically. Simply enough to sharpen every detail. The scent of roses. The distant clink of silver. The anticipation lingering behind polite expressions. That is unexpected, Rosalind said calmly. Apparently not to everyone else. A younger woman giggled. The Duke was involved. Rosalind felt an irrational urge to laugh. Of all the names she expected to hear attached to gossip, Nathaniel Blackthorne ranked near the bottom of the list. The Duke of Westhaven was many things. Powerful. Intelligent. Reserved. He was not a man known for creating social drama. I am certain there has been some misunderstanding. Perhaps. Lady Amelia offered a sympathetic smile. That is what I assumed as well. And now? Now I suspect gentlemen should never be trusted near brandy. A ripple of amusement followed. The conversation shifted before anyone could elaborate further. Yet the damage had already been done. Questions lingered. Rosalind sensed them following her throughout the remainder of the afternoon. She did not ask for clarification. Experience suggested that rumors often died faster when starved of attention. Unfortunately, London rarely behaved according to experience. 2 evenings later she attended a musicale hosted by the Countess of Everley. By then the whispers had grown. Nothing direct. Nothing offensive. Merely enough curious glances to suggest that many people knew something she did not. Rosalind stood near a window overlooking a moonlit garden while musicians prepared for the evening's next performance. She had just accepted a glass of lemonade when her younger sister Catherine approached. Married for nearly 4 years, Catherine retained all the enthusiasm Rosalind herself had long ago learned to conceal. You are becoming fashionable. Rosalind nearly choked on her drink. That is a deeply alarming statement. Catherine laughed. I am serious. Then I am even more alarmed. People are talking about you. Rosalind sighed. You as well. Unfortunately. Catherine lowered her voice. What happened between you and Westhaven? Rosalind stared at her. Nothing happened. That was not the impression I received. Then your source is unreliable. Catherine studied her face carefully. Truly? Truly? You have never met privately. Rosalind thought briefly. Conservatory conversations. Charity meetings. A discussion regarding estate management during a dinner party several months earlier. Always respectable. Always brief. Always public. No. Catherine looked disappointed. That ruins an excellent story. I apologize. Do not. It means I may invent a better one. Before Rosalind could reply, a familiar deep voice sounded nearby. I strongly advise against that. Catherine's eyes widened. Rosalind turned. Nathaniel Blackthorne stood only a few feet away. The crowd naturally parted around him as though accustomed to accommodating his presence. Candlelight caught the dark fabric of his evening coat. His expression remained composed, yet something about his gaze suggested he had heard more of the conversation than propriety allowed. Catherine recovered first. Your Grace. Nathaniel bowed. Mrs. Pennington. I assure you my inventions are always tasteful. That is comforting. Catherine grinned. I should leave before I become the topic of discussion. Rosalind immediately recognized the trap. So did Nathaniel. Catherine escaped anyway. Within seconds she disappeared into the crowd, abandoning both of them. Rosalind looked toward the musicians. Toward the garden. Toward anywhere except the Duke standing beside her. My sister enjoys creating difficulties. I noticed. She considers it a talent. Nathaniel's eyes reflected the faintest trace of amusement. Many younger sisters do. An awkward silence followed. Unexpectedly awkward. Rosalind disliked that. Previous conversations with the Duke had always felt straightforward. Comfortable, even. Tonight something had changed. She could not identify exactly what. Only that an invisible tension now occupied the space between them. Nathaniel seemed aware of it as well. You appear troubled, he said after a moment. Do I? Slightly. Rosalind considered denying it. Instead she chose honesty. There have been rumors. Nathaniel became very still. Such a subtle reaction might have escaped most people. Rosalind did not miss it. I see. Do you? Perhaps. Her gaze narrowed slightly. That is not a reassuring answer. For the first time since she had known him, Nathaniel appeared uncertain. Not visibly. Not enough for society to notice. Enough for her. Rumors are often foolish. That is true. And usually inaccurate. Also true. Then perhaps they deserve little attention. Rosalind studied him. That sounded remarkably prepared. A brief silence followed. Then Nathaniel surprised her by laughing softly. The sound transformed him. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal the man beneath the title. You are very difficult to mislead, Miss Fairchild. I have had years of practice. I believe that. Their eyes met briefly. Something warm passed between them. Unexpected. Fleeting. Dangerous. Rosalind looked away first. Nathaniel seemed to do the same. Across the room, the musicians finally began to play. The first notes of a piano floated through the air. Guests resumed conversations. The moment dissolved. Yet somehow neither of them moved. Will you remain in London for the remainder of the season? Nathaniel asked. Most likely. Good. The word escaped before he could seem to stop it. Rosalind looked back toward him. Nathaniel's expression immediately returned to its usual composure. My mother would be disappointed if you left early, he corrected. She enjoys your company. Rosalind nearly smiled. A convenient recovery. A necessary one. Was it? Another pause followed. Then, to her surprise, Nathaniel smiled. A real smile this time. Not polite. Not formal. Genuine. It lasted only a second. Yet Rosalind suddenly understood why half the unmarried women in England remained fascinated by him. Fortunately, the moment ended before she could examine that realization too closely. An elderly baron approached, requesting Nathaniel's attention regarding estate matters. The Duke excused himself with a bow. Rosalind watched him disappear into the crowd. For reasons she could not entirely explain, the room felt different after he left. Across London, several ambitious mothers would have been delighted by that observation. Rosalind found it deeply inconvenient. Later that evening, while returning home in her family's carriage, she stared out at the gaslit street sliding past the window. The rumors still lingered. If anything, they now felt more confusing than before. One fact remained undeniable. Nathaniel Blackthorne was not behaving quite as she expected. The realization should have meant nothing. Yet somewhere in Mayfair, another whisper was already taking shape. And before the next week ended, it would place both their names at the center of a far larger story than either of them yet understood. 3 days later, the letter arrived. It appeared so ordinary that Rosalind nearly overlooked it entirely. The morning had begun like dozens of others. Pale sunlight filtered through the drawing-room windows of Fairchild House. A faint breeze stirred the lace curtains. Somewhere outside, a vendor called to passing pedestrians while carriage wheels rattled over the cobblestones of Berkeley Square. Rosalind sat beside a small writing desk sorting correspondence that had accumulated over the previous week. Most of it was predictable. Invitations. Charity requests. Notes from acquaintances. A lengthy letter from Catherine describing a dinner party that apparently contained more excitement than good manners. Then she noticed the envelope. It rested near the bottom of the stack. Plain cream paper. No family seal. No recognizable handwriting. Nothing remarkable except for one detail. It had been delivered by hand. Rosalind frowned slightly. Anonymous correspondence rarely brought good news. Another invitation, her mother asked from across the room. I do not believe so. Rosalind turned the envelope over. No signature appeared anywhere. Her mother lowered her spectacles. That sounds promising. You have a peculiar definition of promising. Years of experience. Rosalind smiled faintly before carefully breaking the seal. A single folded sheet slid into her hand. At first glance, the message appeared brief. Then she began reading. Her smile vanished. The note contained only a few sentences. Yet each one seemed colder than the last. Some debts survive longer than memories. Ask yourself why certain families prospered while yours faded into obscurity. Some truths were buried for a reason. If you continue attracting the Duke of Westhaven's attention, the past will not remain hidden. Rosalind stared at the page. For several seconds she did not move. Her mother noticed immediately. Rosalind. She folded the paper instinctively. Nothing important. Her mother raised an eyebrow. You have never been capable of lying convincingly. Rosalind sighed. An unpleasant message. From whom? There is no signature. That immediately commanded attention. Her mother set aside her book. May I see it? After a brief hesitation, Rosalind handed over the note. Silence followed as Lady Fairchild read. Then a crease appeared between her brows. How strange. That was my reaction. It sounds almost threatening. Almost. Her mother reread the final sentence. If you continue attracting the Duke of Westhaven's attention. The older woman looked up slowly. This concerns him. Rosalind wished it did not. Unfortunately, the wording left little room for interpretation. Apparently. Have you attracted his attention? The question should have sounded absurd. Yet Rosalind found herself remembering recent conversations. The music-hall. The conservatory months earlier. The unexpected smile she had witnessed only days ago. I am not entirely certain. Her mother studied her carefully. That is not a denial. Rosalind laughed despite herself. I am not responsible for the imagination of London society. Perhaps not. Her mother folded the letter. But someone clearly wishes you to believe there is a connection. Rosalind accepted the paper back. Unease settled deeper in her chest. The message itself was troubling. Yet another detail disturbed her even more. The reference to the past. Ask yourself why certain families prospered while yours faded into obscurity. The words lingered unpleasantly. The Fairchild family had not suffered ruin. They remained respectable and comfortable. Yet there was truth buried beneath the accusation. Years ago, before Rosalind was old enough to understand such matters, her father had enjoyed far greater influence. The family had moved comfortably among powerful circles. Then circumstances changed. Investments failed. Opportunities disappeared. Nothing dramatic. Nothing scandalous. Simply a gradual decline that few people discussed openly. Her father rarely spoke of those years. After his death, the subject vanished almost entirely. Now someone had chosen to resurrect it. Do you recognize anything? Rosalind asked quietly. Her mother looked puzzled. About the handwriting? Or the reference? Lady Fairchild shook her head. No. That answer should have been reassuring. Instead, it deepened the mystery. By afternoon, Rosalind found herself distracted. She attempted reading. Failed. She attempted embroidery. Failed again. Even correspondence proved impossible. Eventually she retreated to the library, hoping solitude might provide clarity. It did not. The letter remained folded inside her pocket. Every few minutes she found herself rereading it. Each time new questions emerged. Who sent it? Why now? And why involve Nathaniel Blackthorne? The final question troubled her most. Their acquaintance remained limited. Respectable. Entirely innocent. Yet somehow his name now appeared attached to both rumors and anonymous warnings. The coincidence felt increasingly unlikely. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Fairchild. The butler appeared at the doorway. Lord Pennington has arrived. Rosalind blinked. My brother-in-law. Yes, miss. That was unexpected. Matthew Pennington rarely visited during daylight hours unless something required attention. Moments later he entered the library carrying the energy of a man perpetually engaged in 3 conversations simultaneously. Good afternoon. He removed his gloves. You look troubled. Rosalind narrowed her eyes. Her society secretly agreed to begin every conversation that way. Matthew laughed. Possibly. He settled into a nearby chair. What happened? Rosalind hesitated. Then she retrieved the letter and handed it over. Matthew's expression gradually shifted from curiosity to concern. When he finished reading, he looked up immediately. Who sent this? I was hoping you might know. Unfortunately not. He examined the paper more closely. Interesting. That is not the word I would choose. Perhaps not. But whoever wrote it knows something. Rosalind folded her arms. Such as? Enough about your family to make specific references. Matthew tapped the page thoughtfully. And enough about West Haven to include him deliberately. Rosalind disliked hearing the observation spoken aloud. I noticed that. Has he given anyone reason to think he is interested? She considered the question carefully. No. Matthew looked unconvinced. That was not a particularly confident answer. You sound remarkably similar to your wife. Years of marriage. He smiled briefly before growing serious again. May I keep this for a day or two? Rosalind hesitated. Why? Because I know someone who enjoys solving puzzles. Who? West Haven. The answer arrived so quickly that Rosalind almost laughed. Absolutely not. Matthew looked surprised. Why? Because I refuse to hand anonymous gossip directly to the man already connected to it. Reasonable. He paused. Unfortunately, he is also very good at investigations. Rosalind stared at him. Investigations? You think powerful dukes spend all day discussing horses? I suspect some do. Matthew grinned. Not this one. Before Rosalind could reply, another servant appeared at the doorway. A carriage has arrived, my lord. Matthew rose. Duty calls. He handed back the letter. Think about it. I already have. That is the problem. He kissed her forehead affectionately before departing. Silence returned. Rosalind stared down at the folded note once more. By evening, rain had begun falling across London. Drops traced silver paths down the windows while lamps flickered along the street below. Rosalind stood alone beside the glass, watching reflections shimmer across wet pavement. Somewhere beyond the city, answers existed. She felt certain of it. What she lacked was any idea where to begin searching. At almost that same hour, several miles away in West Haven House, Nathaniel Blackthorne sat at his desk reviewing estate correspondence. The task normally required little effort. Tonight he found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times. Finally he pushed the papers aside. His valet, Harrison, noticed immediately. Something wrong, Your Grace. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain outside. No. Harrison wisely said nothing. After years of service, he recognized that answer as meaningless. Nathaniel rose and crossed to the window. An image surfaced unexpectedly. Grey eyes. Quiet intelligence. A woman who somehow remained more interesting than half the celebrated beauties in London combined. He frowned. This was becoming irritating. The wager remained entirely under control. Of course it did. He had spoken with Rosalind only a handful of times. There was nothing unusual about finding her pleasant company. Nothing dangerous. Nothing significant. Yet for reasons he could not entirely explain, he found himself wondering whether she had attended any events that evening. The realization annoyed him enough to abandon his paperwork altogether. Outside, the rain continued falling over London. Inside two separate houses, two separate people found themselves thinking about mysteries they did not yet understand. Neither realized that both mysteries were already connected. And somewhere in the shadows of society, the person who had written the anonymous letter was waiting very patiently for the next move. The following evening, London gathered beneath a blaze of candlelight and crystal. Lady Weatherby's spring ball occupied 3 floors of a magnificent townhouse overlooking Hanover Square. Music drifted through open doors. Laughter echoed beneath painted ceilings. Servants moved gracefully through crowded rooms carrying silver trays of champagne and delicate pastries. It was precisely the sort of event Rosalind normally endured rather than enjoyed. Tonight, however, she arrived carrying an unusual burden. The anonymous letter remained hidden inside her desk at home. Yet its presence seemed to follow her. Every conversation felt slightly sharper. Every glance seemed to contain a question she could not answer. She entered the ballroom on her mother's arm and immediately felt the familiar sensation of becoming part of a carefully choreographed performance. Ladies displayed elegance. Gentlemen displayed confidence. Everyone displayed versions of themselves designed for public consumption. Rosalind had spent years observing the ritual. She no longer expected much from it. "You are drifting into your thoughts again," Lady Fairchild murmured. Rosalind smiled faintly. "I am attempting to survive the evening." A noble ambition. Her mother squeezed her arm. "Try not to look as though you are attending a funeral." "I shall do my best." They separated moments later as acquaintances approached. Rosalind exchanged greetings, accepted compliments regarding her gown, discussed the weather, and endured several conversations that required remarkably little actual thought. Nearly an hour passed before she finally escaped toward a quieter section of the ballroom near the refreshment tables. Relief washed through her immediately. For a brief moment, she could simply observe. Across the room, couples moved through a waltz beneath sparkling chandeliers. Young débutantes laughed behind elegant fans. Ambitious mothers watched every eligible gentleman with military precision. Rosalind found herself smiling despite everything. Society could be exhausting. It could also be strangely entertaining. Miss Fairchild. She turned. A gentleman she vaguely recognized approached with a self-satisfied smile. Mr. Lionel Prescott. Wealthy. Well-connected. Universally convinced of his own charm. None of those qualities had ever particularly impressed her. "Mr. Prescott." He bowed. "You are looking remarkably lovely this evening." "Thank you. I was beginning to think you intended to avoid all social gatherings this season." "That would have been difficult." "Why?" His smile widened. "Half of London appears fascinated by you at the moment." Rosalind felt her stomach tighten. There it was again. The rumor. The whispers. The endless speculation. London has many peculiar interests. Indeed. He leaned slightly closer. "Although I admit this particular fascination surprised me." Rosalind's smile cooled. "How so?" "Forgive my bluntness." His tone suggested no actual intention of seeking forgiveness. "You have attended society for years without attracting much attention." Then suddenly one conversation with a duke and everyone forgets you were nearly invisible. Several nearby guests glanced toward them. Rosalind noticed immediately. So did he. That was precisely why he continued. It is rather extraordinary what powerful men can accomplish. Her cheeks warmed. Not from embarrassment. From anger. The remark had been carefully crafted. Polite enough to avoid open offense. Cruel enough to wound. Most of all, it transformed her from a person into a curiosity. A woman receiving attention she had not earned. Rosalind straightened. I was unaware my value depended upon public fascination. Surely you do not object to finally receiving some. The words landed harder than he intended. Or perhaps exactly as intended. A small silence spread through the nearby group. People were listening now. Not openly. Never openly. But listening nonetheless. Rosalind felt every eye. Every expectation. Every whispered story that had followed her for days. She could have ignored him. She could have walked away. Years of experience had taught her the safest response to many forms of social cruelty. Yet before she could speak, another voice entered the conversation. Calm. Deep. Unmistakable. Mr. Prescott. The atmosphere changed instantly. Rosalind turned. Nathaniel Blackthorne stood only a few feet away. She had no idea how long he had been there. Judging by the expression on his face, long enough. Mr. Prescott visibly stiffened. Your Grace. Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed on him. I believe Miss Fairchild was attempting to enjoy her evening. Of course. Prescott laughed nervously. We were merely conversing. Were you? The question sounded perfectly polite. Somehow that made it worse. Several people nearby suddenly discovered great interest in their refreshments. Nathaniel took one measured step forward. Then perhaps I misunderstood. Prescott shifted uncomfortably. There is no misunderstanding. Excellent. Nathaniel's tone remained pleasant. Controlled. Because I would hate to think a gentleman had chosen to entertain himself at a lady's expense. Complete silence followed. Rosalind felt it spread through the surrounding crowd like ripples across still water. Prescott opened his mouth. Closed it again. Nathaniel had not raised his voice. He had not issued a threat. Yet everyone understood exactly what had happened. A line had been drawn. Mr. Prescott recognized it as clearly as anyone. Certainly not. I am relieved. Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. Then I am sure Miss Fairchild will accept your apologies. Rosalind blinked. So did Mr. Prescott. For several seconds nobody moved. Finally Prescott cleared his throat. Miss Fairchild, if my remarks caused offense, I regret it. Rosalind could hardly believe what she was witnessing. Thank you. The man offered an awkward bow before retreating with remarkable speed. Conversation gradually resumed throughout the ballroom. Yet Rosalind could feel curiosity lingering everywhere. Nathaniel had intervened publicly. That fact alone would generate discussion before the evening ended. She turned toward him. You did not need to do that. Perhaps not. You embarrassed him. He seemed determined to embarrass himself. Despite her efforts, a laugh escaped. Nathaniel looked suspiciously pleased by that outcome. You realize people will talk about this. People already talk. Unfortunately, that was true. Rosalind folded her hands together. You appear remarkably unconcerned. Should I be? Most gentlemen prefer avoiding gossip. Nathaniel considered the question. Most gentlemen are not responsible for it. The answer surprised her. You think you are responsible? Something flickered behind his eyes. Gone almost instantly. Not intentionally. Rosalind remembered the rumors. The whispers. The mysterious conversation she still did not fully understand. Before she could pursue the thought, another couple moved past them. The orchestra began preparing for the next dance. The moment shifted. Yet neither of them stepped away. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nathaniel looked at her. Really looked at her. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade around them. "You do not need my protection, Miss Fairchild." The statement should have ended there. Instead, he added something unexpected. "But that does not mean I enjoy seeing you treated unfairly." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Rosalind felt something warm and unfamiliar settle inside her chest. Dangerous. Complicated. Entirely unwelcome. That is a very generous sentiment. No. His gaze held hers. It is a truthful one. Somewhere across the room, Lady Weatherby called for the next dance to begin. Couples moved toward the floor. Music swelled. Reality returned. Nathaniel seemed to recognize it first. He stepped back slightly. Formality settled over his features once more. Yet something had changed. Rosalind could feel it. So could he. "May I request this dance?" he asked. Her heart stumbled. Ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. She had danced countless times throughout her life. Yet somehow this felt different. More significant than it should. Around them, people were already watching. She knew it. Nathaniel knew it as well. Refusing would create speculation. Accepting would create even more. For one absurd moment she almost laughed at the impossibility of the situation. Then she placed her hand in his. "Yes, Your Grace." A strange expression crossed his face. Satisfaction, perhaps. Relief. Something she could not quite identify. Together they moved toward the ballroom floor. Behind them, whispers immediately resumed. Ahead of them, candlelight shimmered across polished marble. And somewhere among the watching crowd, hidden behind smiles and fans and pleasant conversation, one particular observer watched the scene unfold with growing displeasure. The same observer who had already sent one anonymous letter. The same observer who had no intention of allowing events to continue unchecked. As the first notes of the waltz filled the room, a new piece had been placed upon the board. Neither Rosalind nor Nathaniel yet realized how carefully someone else had been planning the next move. For the remainder of the dance, Rosalind found herself engaged in a battle she had not anticipated. The opponent was not the Duke of Westhaven. It was her own awareness of him. The realization annoyed her considerably. The ballroom around them moved in a swirl of candlelight and music. Couples glided across the polished floor. Laughter rose and fell like distant waves. Yet somehow the space occupied by Nathaniel Blackthorne seemed unusually difficult to ignore. He danced well. That alone was hardly surprising. A man raised within the highest circles of English society would naturally master every social expectation imposed upon him. What surprised her was the ease of his company. Most powerful men treated conversation as another form of authority. Nathaniel treated it as an exchange. "You are frowning," he observed. Rosalind looked up. "I was not aware I was doing so." "You were." "Perhaps I am contemplating a difficult problem." "Am I the problem?" The question arrived so unexpectedly that she nearly laughed. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you intend to continue rescuing me from my own conversations." A flicker of amusement appeared in his eyes. "I believe you could have handled Mr. Prescott quite effectively without assistance." "Then why intervene?" Nathaniel's expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to suggest he was considering his answer carefully. "Because someone should have." Rosalind studied him. "That sounds suspiciously noble." "Do not tell anyone. Your secret is safe." The faint smile that followed transformed his face again. Rosalind immediately looked away. Unfortunately, that did nothing to eliminate the memory. The dance ended far sooner than she expected. They returned to the edge of the ballroom amid a renewed wave of whispers. This time she noticed them more clearly. Curious glances. Quiet speculation. A few openly surprised expressions. London had spent years overlooking Rosalind Fairchild. Suddenly people appeared unable to stop watching her. She disliked the sensation. Nathaniel seemed to notice. Regretting the dance, he asked. Not the dance. The audience. Precisely. They will find another subject soon enough. Rosalind raised an eyebrow. You do not actually believe that? No. At least you are honest. Before Nathaniel could respond, a woman approached from across the room. Tall. Elegant. Strikingly beautiful. Lady Victoria Hawthorne possessed the sort of appearance that inspired poets and irritated other women in equal measure. Rosalind recognized her immediately. Most of London did. Victoria offered Nathaniel a warm smile. Your Grace. Nathaniel bowed politely. Lady Victoria. Rosalind instantly detected the difference. He remained perfectly courteous. Yet the easy warmth that had appeared during their own conversation vanished. Lady Victoria either did not notice or chose to ignore it. I was hoping you might reserve the next dance for me. Nathaniel's expression remained calm. I am afraid I cannot. Surprise flickered briefly across her face. Already engaged? Yes. The answer seemed to disappoint her. How unfortunate. Her gaze shifted toward Rosalind. The smile remained. Something colder appeared behind it. Miss Fairchild. Lady Victoria. Another brief silence followed. Not hostile. Merely careful. The sort women often exchanged when measuring one another. Lady Victoria eventually moved on after a few more pleasantries. Rosalind watched her disappear into the crowd. She is beautiful, she remarked. Nathaniel glanced toward the ballroom. Many people believe so. That was an unusually diplomatic response. Was it? Most men would simply agree. Most men are free to answer however they choose. Rosalind laughed softly. You avoid traps remarkably well. Years of practice. Perhaps we have more in common than I realized. The words escaped before she fully considered them. Nathaniel looked at her. Something shifted again. A small moment. Quiet. Yet impossible to miss. Fortunately, salvation arrived in the form of Catherine. Rosalind's younger sister appeared carrying enough enthusiasm to illuminate half the ballroom. There you are. Catherine stopped abruptly upon noticing Nathaniel. Your Grace. Mrs. Pennington. Catherine's gaze moved between them. Once. Twice. Her expression became deeply suspicious. Rosalind recognized the look immediately. Trouble had arrived. You appear very cheerful, Rosalind said carefully. I am. Catherine smiled. I have spent the past 20 minutes listening to society attempt to explain why the Duke of Westhaven danced with my sister. Nathaniel looked away. Rosalind suspected he was hiding amusement. And what conclusion did they reach? She asked. Several. Catherine counted on her fingers. You are secretly engaged. You are secretly related. You are secretly conducting political negotiations. Political negotiations. Nathaniel repeated. Do not ask. Catherine waved dismissively. That theory became very complicated. Rosalind closed her eyes briefly. I dislike London. No, you do not. Catherine linked her arm through Rosalind's. You merely dislike being discussed. Unfortunately, her sister was correct. Nathaniel excused himself shortly afterward to greet an elderly marquis. Rosalind watched him go before she could stop herself. Catherine noticed immediately. Of course she did. Younger sisters possessed an alarming talent for noticing things they should not. Interesting. Rosalind sighed. Do not start. I have not said anything. You are about to. Probably. Catherine grinned. He likes you. Rosalind nearly laughed. Do not be ridiculous. I am perfectly serious. He is polite. Not to everyone. He is kind. Also not to everyone. Rosalind shook her head. You are imagining things. Catherine looked entirely unconvinced. Perhaps. Yet the word lacked conviction. The conversation followed Rosalind long after the evening ended. It followed her home. It followed her through breakfast the next morning. Most annoyingly, it followed her into Hyde Park 2 days later. The afternoon was unusually pleasant for spring. Sunlight filtered through fresh green leaves. Carriages rolled slowly along Rotten Row while riders enjoyed the warm weather. Rosalind accompanied her mother on a leisurely drive through the park. She had almost managed to forget Catherine's observations when another carriage approached from the opposite direction. Nathaniel. The recognition arrived instantly. So did an entirely unreasonable awareness of her own heartbeat. Their carriages slowed naturally as they passed. Nathaniel removed his hat. Lady Fairchild smiled warmly. Rosalind returned the greeting. The encounter lasted perhaps 10 seconds. No more. Yet afterward she found herself staring out the window far longer than necessary. He appears determined to notice you, her mother observed quietly. Rosalind groaned. Not you as well. I merely stated an observation. Everyone is becoming impossible. Lady Fairchild laughed. That is often how these situations begin. There is no situation. If you say so. Rosalind refused to answer. Yet later that evening, as she sat alone beside the library fire, she found herself thinking about something entirely different. The anonymous letter. Several days had passed since its arrival. No further messages appeared. No new clues emerged. If anything, the silence felt increasingly deliberate. Someone wanted her uneasy. Someone wanted her watching shadows. Most troubling of all, the warning continued to mention Nathaniel without explanation. She retrieved the folded note from a nearby drawer and reread it for perhaps the 20th time. The words remained just as unsettling. Some debts survive longer than memories. Ask yourself why certain families prospered while yours faded into obscurity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss? The butler entered carrying a silver tray. This arrived a few moments ago. Rosalind immediately felt her stomach tighten. Another envelope rested upon the tray. Plain cream paper. No seal. No signature. Exactly like the first one. The room suddenly seemed colder. Slowly, she accepted it. The butler withdrew. Silence returned. For several seconds she simply stared at the envelope. Then she broke the seal. Inside waited another sheet of paper. This message contained only one sentence. The Duke is closer to the truth than either of you realize. Rosalind felt every trace of warmth leave her face. Beneath the message appeared a small symbol drawn in dark ink. A crest. Not complete. Only a fragment. Yet she recognized part of it immediately. She had seen it before. Years ago. Among her father's private papers. And for the first time since the mystery began, genuine fear was replaced by something stronger. Determination. Whoever was orchestrating this knew something about her family. Something connected to the past. Something connected to Nathaniel. And now they had made a mistake. Because instead of retreating, Rosalind intended to find answers. Even if it meant walking directly into the center of whatever secret someone was trying so desperately to keep hidden. Rosalind did not sleep well that night. The second letter remained folded beneath her pillow long after the candles had been extinguished and the house had fallen silent. She read the sentence repeatedly in the darkness, as though new answers might somehow emerge from familiar words. They never did. The Duke is closer to the truth than either of you realize. The message raised more questions than it resolved. Yet one fact had become impossible to ignore. Whoever was sending the letters wanted Nathaniel involved. Whether as a warning, a threat, or a clue remained uncertain. By morning, determination had replaced confusion. Rosalind descended to breakfast with the fragment of the crest tucked safely inside her reticule. Her mother immediately noticed the change. You have made a decision. Rosalind paused. Is it truly that obvious? To me, yes. Lady Fairchild set aside her teacup. What are you planning? Rosalind considered her answer carefully. I intend to learn why someone keeps writing to me. That sounds sensible. It may also require asking uncomfortable questions. Her mother's expression softened. About your father? Rosalind nodded. Silence settled briefly between them. Lord Fairchild had been gone for nearly 7 years. Time softened grief but never erased it entirely. There were things he never discussed, Lady Fairchild admitted quietly. Particularly during his final years. Why? Pride, perhaps. Or regret. Rosalind looked down at the folded note resting beside her plate. Do you know anything about the crest? Lady Fairchild examined the sketch. For several moments she said nothing. Then she frowned. It seems familiar. Hope stirred immediately. From where? I am not certain. The uncertainty returned just as quickly. I wish I could be more helpful. Rosalind forced a smile. You already are. Yet disappointment lingered. She needed answers. Instead, she seemed to be collecting mysteries. The following afternoon brought another social obligation. Lady Davenport's garden gathering occupied a sprawling estate on the outskirts of London. Guests wandered among blooming roses while musicians performed beneath white canopies. It was precisely the sort of event Rosalind would normally tolerate with quiet patience. Today she found herself scanning the crowd for a particular face. The realization annoyed her. More troubling, she could not honestly deny it. Nathaniel arrived nearly an hour after she did. She noticed him immediately. Apparently so did half the women present. The Duke of Westhaven possessed an unfortunate tendency to attract attention simply by entering a room. Or a garden. Or any other location occupied by human beings. Rosalind firmly reminded herself that such things were none of her concern. Then she caught herself watching him cross the lawn. Her irritation deepened. You are staring. Catherine appeared beside her carrying a glass of lemonade. Rosalind nearly jumped. You move like a spy. You were distracted. Catherine followed her gaze. Ah. Rosalind groaned. Do not begin. I have not said anything. You never need to. Catherine's grin became unbearable. Fortunately, another guest approached before further damage could occur. Unfortunately, that guest was Nathaniel. Mrs. Pennington. He bowed politely. Miss Fairchild. Catherine looked delighted. Rosalind considered abandoning her sister to fate. Your Grace. Nathaniel's attention settled on Rosalind. The sensation had become increasingly familiar. Not uncomfortable. Merely impossible to ignore. I hope you are enjoying the afternoon. I am surviving it. Something amused him. A modest ambition. An achievable one. Catherine looked between them. I suddenly remember another engagement. Rosalind turned sharply. You do not. I do. Catherine stepped backward. Good afternoon. Then she vanished into the crowd before either could stop her. Rosalind sighed. Nathaniel looked suspiciously entertained. She is remarkably efficient. At creating problems. I suspect she considers them opportunities. Rosalind laughed despite herself. They began walking slowly along a gravel path lined with roses. Neither seemed particularly eager to return to the larger gathering. For several minutes conversation remained easy. Estate management. Books. Travel. Topics shifted naturally from one to another. Rosalind eventually realized she had forgotten about the crowd entirely. That realization proved surprisingly dangerous. May I ask you something? Nathaniel said. You may. Have you received any unusual correspondence recently? Rosalind stopped walking. The question landed with startling force. Nathaniel noticed immediately. I see that was not the reaction I expected. Rosalind searched his expression. Calm. Curious. Genuine. Why would you ask that? For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Because I received something unusual myself. Her pulse quickened. A letter. 2 days ago. The world seemed to narrow around them. The garden faded. The music faded. Everything except those words. Nathaniel studied her carefully. You have received one as well. It was not a question. Rosalind hesitated. Every instinct urged caution. Yet another instinct, one she trusted far less, suggested honesty. Yes. Nathaniel became very still. Anonymous. Yes. Concerning your family. Her breath caught. How do you know that? Nathaniel looked troubled. Genuinely troubled. Because mine mentioned yours. Silence followed. Heavy. Unexpected. Neither moved. What exactly did your letter say? Rosalind asked quietly. Nathaniel glanced around to ensure nobody stood nearby. It suggested that my father owed a debt to yours. The word struck like a bell. A debt. The same implication hidden within her own letters. Nathaniel continued. At first I dismissed it as nonsense. Then another note arrived. Rosalind slowly reached into her reticule and withdrew the second letter. Nathaniel read it carefully. His expression darkened. Not with anger. With concentration. This symbol. He touched the edge of the page. You recognize it. Partially. Nathaniel frowned. So do I. Their eyes met. A strange mixture of surprise and understanding passed between them. For the first time since the mystery began, Rosalind no longer felt alone within it. Nathaniel folded the letter and returned it carefully. I think someone wants us asking questions. To what purpose? That remains unclear. Rosalind studied him. Do you intend to investigate? The answer arrived immediately. Yes. Something about the certainty of it eased a tension she had carried for days. Nathaniel noticed. You were planning the same thing. Obviously. His smile appeared before he could stop it. Of course. They resumed walking. Yet something fundamental had shifted. The mystery no longer belonged solely to Rosalind. It belonged to both of them. The realization should have complicated matters. Instead, it felt strangely reassuring. Unfortunately, not everyone observing them shared that opinion. From a shaded terrace overlooking the gardens, Lady Victoria Hawthorne watched the pair with growing displeasure. She had watched them for nearly 10 minutes. Long enough to recognize the change in their expressions. Long enough to see familiarity replacing formality. Long enough to understand that something important was happening. Her grip tightened around her fan. Nearby, another woman followed her gaze. They seemed comfortable together. Victoria's smile never wavered. Appearances can be misleading. Yet the words sounded less convincing than intended. Back in the garden, Rosalind and Nathaniel reached a quiet section of the grounds where flowering hedges shielded them from most of the crowd. There is something else, Rosalind admitted. She showed him the sketch of the crest. Nathaniel studied it closely. For several seconds he said nothing. Then his eyes narrowed. I know where I have seen this. Hope flared immediately. Where? In my father's records. Rosalind stared at him. Nathaniel looked equally surprised. It was attached to an old business agreement. I remember because the document was unusually important. Important how? I do not know. Frustration crossed his face. I only saw it once years ago. Another silence followed. Yet this one felt different. Productive. The first genuine lead they had discovered. Nathaniel finally looked at her. Allow me to examine the West Haven archives. Rosalind hesitated. That seems dangerous. Probably. You say that very casually. Experience. Despite herself, she smiled. Nathaniel returned the expression. For a brief moment neither spoke. The afternoon sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. Somewhere beyond the hedges, guests laughed. The season continued around them exactly as before. Yet something had changed. 14 days earlier, Nathaniel Blackthorne would have considered this conversation impossible. 14 days earlier, Rosalind Fairchild had occupied only the distant edge of his awareness. Now she stood at the center of a mystery he could not stop thinking about. More troubling still, she was beginning to occupy the center of his thoughts as well. He did not yet recognize the danger. Rosalind did not recognize it either. But somewhere deep beneath curiosity, beneath friendship, beneath every reasonable explanation either of them preferred to believe, something far more powerful had already begun to grow. And neither was nearly as unaffected as they imagined. The scandal arrived on a Thursday afternoon, and by sunset it had conquered London. No one ever discovered where the story began. Some blamed careless servants. Others blamed ambitious social climbers. A few blamed bored aristocrats with too much time and too little purpose. Whatever the source, the result was devastatingly effective. By the time Rosalind entered Lady Pembroke's music hall that evening, dozens of people already knew a version of the story. Unfortunately, most versions were close enough to the truth to be dangerous. She sensed something was wrong the moment she stepped inside. Conversations faltered. Fans paused mid-motion. Several women looked away too quickly. Others did not look away at all. Rosalind stopped beside the entrance and felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Do you notice it?" she asked quietly. Lady Fairchild's expression tightened. "Yes." The room glittered with candlelight and polished silver. Music drifted softly from a quartet positioned near the grand staircase. Yet beneath the elegance lurked something ugly. Curiosity. Speculation. Judgment. The very thing society enjoyed most. "Perhaps we should leave," her mother suggested. Rosalind considered it. Then she straightened her shoulders. No. Retreat would only feed the gossip. Whatever this was, she would face it. They moved farther into the room. Almost immediately, whispers followed. Rosalind caught fragments as she passed. "That is her." Apparently he said it himself. "A wager." How humiliating. Her pulse quickened. A wager. For one brief second she could not breathe. Then understanding arrived with brutal clarity. Whitehall Club. The rumors. The strange conversation everyone seemed reluctant to explain. Nathaniel. The room suddenly felt too warm. Too crowded. Too small. Catherine appeared from nowhere, her face pale with concern. "Rosalind. Tell me." Her sister hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. "Tell me." Catherine lowered her voice. Someone revealed a conversation that took place at Whitehall Club several weeks ago. Rosalind already knew what came next. Somehow that did not soften the impact. "Go on." The Duke was speaking with friends. Catherine swallowed. "They teased him about you." Rosalind felt every eye in the room. Every whisper. Every pitying glance. And a wager was made. There it was. The word she had already heard. The word now echoing throughout London. Catherine's voice softened further. "The story claims he boasted that he could spend an entire season in your company without developing feelings." Rosalind stared at her. For a moment, everything seemed distant. The music. The conversations. The laughter. All of it faded beneath a single realization. She had become entertainment. A challenge. A test of a man's self-control. Not a woman. Not a person. Merely a subject for amusement. Catherine reached for her hand. "Rosalind." She pulled away gently. Not because she was angry. Because she needed a moment to remain standing. "How many people know?" Catherine's expression said everything. "Everyone." The answer settled heavily inside her chest. Across the room, two young ladies glanced toward her and immediately began whispering. An older woman shook her head sympathetically. Another looked openly amused. Rosalind had endured social slights before. She had survived years of being overlooked. Yet this felt different. This was public humiliation disguised as gossip. Worse, it carried enough truth to make denial impossible. "I need some air," she said quietly. Catherine nodded immediately. "I will come with you." "No." Rosalind forced a smile she did not feel. "Stay." Before anyone could argue, she turned and headed toward the terrace doors. Cool evening air greeted her the moment she stepped outside. The gardens beyond the townhouse glowed beneath lantern light. Roses perfumed the breeze. Somewhere nearby, water trickled from a marble fountain. Rosalind crossed to the stone balustrade and gripped it lightly. She rarely cried. Tonight she refused to begin. The humiliation was painful. The disappointment was worse. Because somewhere during the past 2 weeks, she had started believing Nathaniel was different. Honest. Respectful. Someone whose attention meant something. Now every conversation seemed uncertain. Every smile questionable. Every moment suddenly suspect. Had he been laughing at her from the beginning? Had his friends? Had everyone? The thought hurt far more than she wished to admit. Miss Fairchild. Her eyes closed briefly. Of course. She knew that voice. Nathaniel approached slowly across the terrace. He looked unusually grim. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Angry. "I was looking for you," he said. Rosalind laughed softly. The sound held no amusement. "That seems unlikely." Nathaniel stopped several feet away. "Rosalind." It was the first time he had used her given name. Under different circumstances she might have noticed. Tonight she noticed only the ache behind it. "Is it true?" she asked. Nathaniel did not pretend to misunderstand. His jaw tightened. Partially. The honesty should have helped. Instead it made everything worse. There was a wager. "Yes. You told your friends you could spend an entire season with me without developing feelings." Silence. Then, quietly, "Yes." The truth landed harder than any lie. Rosalind looked away. Lantern light blurred briefly before sharpening again. "I see." "No, you do not." Nathaniel took a step forward. "You deserve an explanation." "Do I?" Her voice remained calm. Surprisingly calm. "Because it feels very much as though I deserve an apology." Pain flashed across his face. Genuine pain. Yet she found little comfort in it. "You are right." The words came immediately. "You do." Neither spoke for several seconds. Music drifted faintly through the open doors behind them. Inside, London continued gossiping. Outside, everything felt painfully still. "I never intended for this to reach you." Nathaniel's voice was low. Controlled. It was a foolish conversation. Nothing more. Rosalind looked at him. Nothing more. At the time. The answer escaped before he could stop it. Their eyes met. Something complicated passed between them. Regret. Frustration. Perhaps something deeper. Rosalind did not want to examine it. Not now. At the time, she repeated. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "I was arrogant." That is certainly one interpretation. To his credit, he almost smiled. Almost. Then the expression vanished. "I never meant to make you a subject of ridicule." Yet here we are. Footsteps sounded behind them. Several guests had wandered onto the terrace. Their conversation immediately slowed when they noticed the pair standing together. Curiosity burned in every glance. Rosalind felt it like sunlight against her skin. They were watching. Waiting. Judging. Nathaniel noticed as well. Something cold entered his expression. He turned toward the observers. Is there a problem? The question was perfectly polite. No one answered. A few looked embarrassed. Others retreated entirely. Within moments the terrace emptied again. Rosalind stared at him. You cannot intimidate all of London. Perhaps not. His gaze returned to her. But I can try. Despite everything, a reluctant spark of amusement surfaced. It vanished almost instantly. The hurt remained stronger. Nathaniel seemed to understand. I am sorry. Simple words. Sincere words. Yet not enough. Not yet. Rosalind looked toward the garden. Toward the darkness beyond the lanterns. Anywhere except him. I think I should go home. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. The reaction lasted less than a second. If that is what you want. It is. Another silence stretched between them. Finally Rosalind inclined her head. Good evening, Your Grace. Formal. Distant. Deliberate. Nathaniel heard the change immediately. She knew because the loss appeared in his face before he could hide it. Good evening, Miss Fairchild. She walked away without looking back. Behind her, Nathaniel remained motionless on the terrace long after she disappeared inside. For the first time since making that careless wager, he understood the true cost of it. And for the first time, the possibility of losing Rosalind felt far more frightening than losing any bet ever could. Meanwhile, hidden within the crowded ballroom, a woman watched the entire exchange from behind a painted fan. Lady Victoria Hawthorne smiled slowly. The scandal had finally exploded. The distance growing between Rosalind and the Duke was exactly what she had hoped for. What she did not realize was that some stories become strongest at the moment they appear broken. And tonight, beneath the humiliation and misunderstanding, something far more dangerous had begun to emerge. Nathaniel Blackthorne was no longer trying to prove he felt nothing. He was beginning to realize exactly how much he felt. The morning after the musicale felt strangely quiet. London continued talking, of course. Society never abandoned a scandal before discovering a newer one. Yet inside Fairchild House, silence settled like a heavy curtain over every room. Rosalind spent most of the day avoiding visitors. She declined invitations. Ignored notes. Refused even Catherine's determined attempts to drag her back into society. By evening, 3 bouquets had arrived from various well-meaning acquaintances. 2 letters offered sympathy disguised as concern. 1 contained barely concealed curiosity. Rosalind burned that one immediately. She stood beside the library fireplace watching the paper curl into ash. That seems dramatic, Catherine observed from the doorway. Rosalind did not turn around. It was satisfying. Fair enough. Catherine entered carrying a tray with tea. Mother says you have barely eaten. Mother worries professionally. She learned from the best. Rosalind smiled despite herself. The smile vanished almost immediately. Catherine noticed. She always did. You are hurt. The simple statement landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Rosalind lowered her gaze toward the flames. I am embarrassed. That too. Catherine set down the tray. But mostly hurt. Silence stretched between them. Finally Rosalind sat in a nearby chair. Do you know what the worst part is? Tell me. Not the wager itself. Catherine frowned. No. Men say foolish things. Pride encourages stupidity. Society rewards both. She clasped her hands together. The worst part is that I believed him. Catherine's expression softened. Rosalind. I thought he respected me. The confession felt strangely painful. More painful than the scandal itself. Perhaps he does. Then he has an unfortunate method of showing it. Catherine could not argue with that. Neither could Rosalind. Yet deep inside, another truth lingered stubbornly. Nathaniel's apology on the terrace had been genuine. She knew it. That knowledge complicated everything. It would have been easier if he were cruel. Easier if he were arrogant. Easier if she could dismiss him entirely. Instead, she remembered his expression when she walked away. The memory refused to leave. Across London, Nathaniel Blackthorne was experiencing a similarly miserable evening. Whitehall Club, normally a refuge from society's nonsense, had become intolerable. Every conversation seemed to circle back toward the scandal. Every glance carried questions. Every friend suddenly possessed opinions. Nathaniel had endured exactly 23 minutes before abandoning the club altogether. Now he sat alone in his study at West Haven House. The anonymous letters lay spread across his desk. Business records from his late father's archives surrounded them. None of it held his attention. Theodore Ravenshire entered without waiting for permission. Years of friendship had long ago eliminated such formalities. "You look terrible." Nathaniel barely glanced up. "Thank you." Theodore dropped into a chair opposite him. "That was intended as concern. I prefer criticism. It feels more familiar." Theodore studied him carefully. "You are in trouble." Nathaniel laughed without humor. An insightful observation. "Not because of the scandal." Theodore leaned forward. "Because you care." Silence. Nathaniel stared down at the papers scattered across his desk. The room seemed suddenly smaller. Theodore continued. "You spent years insisting you were immune to this sort of thing. Apparently I was mistaken." "Apparently." Another silence followed. Then Nathaniel spoke quietly. "I hurt her." Theodore did not joke. Did not smile. "Yes." The honesty stung. Nathaniel accepted it anyway. "And now?" Theodore asked. Nathaniel looked toward the rain-speckled window. "Now she wants nothing to do with me." "Do you blame her?" "No." Theodore sighed. "That makes this considerably more difficult." Nathaniel almost smiled. Almost. Yet another realization haunted him. The wager no longer mattered. Winning no longer mattered. Pride no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was Rosalind. That truth arrived with startling clarity. And with equally startling terror. 2 days later, matters grew worse. Rosalind attended a small charity luncheon only because her mother insisted complete isolation would encourage further speculation. She arrived determined to endure the afternoon and leave as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, society had other plans. The moment she entered the drawing room, conversation shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. The same sympathetic smiles. The same curious glances. The same awful awareness of becoming a story instead of a person. Rosalind maintained her composure. Years of practice served her well. Yet each whispered conversation felt like another stone added to an invisible burden. Midway through the afternoon, she found herself standing near a window speaking with an elderly countess when 2 younger women wandered past. Neither realized she could hear them. "I almost feel sorry for her." "Why?" "Imagine discovering you were only a challenge." Soft laughter followed. At least the Duke chose an interesting target. Rosalind felt every word. The countess beside her stiffened visibly. "How rude." "Quite." Rosalind's voice remained calm. The effort required nearly exhausted her. By the time she returned home, she had reached a decision. The next morning she announced it at breakfast. "I am leaving London." Her mother looked up immediately. Catherine nearly dropped her teacup. "What?" Rosalind folded her napkin carefully. "Only for a time." "Where?" Catherine demanded. "Cornwall." Silence followed. The Fairchild family maintained a small coastal property there. Modest. Peaceful. Far removed from London's endless appetite for gossip. "You are running away," Catherine accused. "I am escaping." "That is the same thing." "Not remotely." Rosalind rose from her chair. I need distance. Her mother studied her quietly. From society. Rosalind hesitated. Then she answered honestly. From everything. No one argued after that. They recognized the exhaustion beneath her composure. The hurt beneath her dignity. Preparations began immediately. By afternoon, trunks were being packed. Servants received instructions. Travel arrangements were finalized. The departure would occur in 2 days. Word spread quickly. Far too quickly. Nathaniel learned of it the following evening from Theodore. The information struck with surprising force. She is leaving. Theodore nodded. Cornwall, apparently. Nathaniel stared at him. When? Tomorrow morning. A strange emptiness opened inside his chest. Irrational. Unwelcome. Impossible to ignore. Because of the scandal. It was not a question. Theodore shook his head slowly. Because of what the scandal did to her. The distinction mattered. Nathaniel understood that immediately. After Theodore departed, he remained alone in his study for nearly an hour. The house around him faded into silence. Finally his gaze drifted toward the letters spread across his desk. The mystery. The crest. The connection between their families. All of it suddenly felt more urgent. Not because of curiosity. Because Rosalind was leaving before they uncovered the truth. Before he had a chance to repair anything. Before he had a chance to explain. The realization settled heavily inside him. Meanwhile, several miles away, Rosalind stood in her bedroom overlooking moonlit rooftops. Trunks waited near the door. Travel cloaks had been prepared. By this time tomorrow, London would be behind her. The thought should have brought relief. Instead it brought sadness. She hated that. Most of all, she hated the reason. Her gaze drifted toward the writing desk. The anonymous letters rested inside a locked drawer. The mystery remained unresolved. Yet for the first time, she no longer possessed the energy to pursue it. Let someone else uncover the truth. Let someone else untangle the past. She was tired. Outside, rain began falling softly against the glass. Inside, neither Rosalind nor Nathaniel slept particularly well. And as dawn approached, both found themselves haunted by the same uncomfortable realization. 2 weeks earlier, they had been strangers. Now the prospect of separation felt far more painful than either of them had any right to admit. The morning Rosalind left London dawned beneath a blanket of grey clouds. A fine mist drifted through the city streets, softening the edges of buildings and turning the world beyond the carriage windows into a watercolour of muted colours. Under different circumstances, she might have found the weather melancholy. Today it simply felt appropriate. Fairchild House stirred long before sunrise. Servants loaded trunks. Final instructions were exchanged. Lady Fairchild moved through the household with quiet efficiency while Catherine alternated between helping and complaining about the entire situation. Rosalind stood in the front hall fastening her gloves as the grandfather clock struck 7. Everything was ready. Everything except her heart. She disliked the thought immediately. It sounded dangerously sentimental. Yet honesty left little room for denial. London had wounded her. The scandal had humiliated her. Even so, leaving felt less like freedom and more like surrender. You can still change your mind, Catherine said for perhaps the 6th time. Rosalind smiled faintly. No. You could remain another week. No. 3 days. No. Catherine sighed dramatically. I admire your consistency. Thank you. That was not a compliment. Rosalind laughed despite herself. The sound eased some of the tension lingering inside the house. Lady Fairchild approached and adjusted a fold in her daughter's travelling cloak. Write often. I will. And eat properly. I shall try. Her mother's eyes softened. Find some peace, Rosalind. The simple wish nearly unravelled her composure. She embraced both women before stepping toward the waiting carriage. The journey to Cornwall would require several days. Long enough for distance. Long enough for reflection. Long enough, perhaps, to forget. Unfortunately, forgetting had already proven more difficult than expected. Several miles away, Nathaniel Blackthorne stood at the window of his study watching rain slide down the glass. He had been awake since before dawn. Sleep had abandoned him sometime around midnight. The realization irritated him almost as much as the reason behind it. Rosalind was leaving. By now she had likely already departed. The knowledge settled heavily inside him. He should have accepted it. Instead, he found himself pacing his study like a restless prisoner. Harrison, his valet, entered carrying correspondence. "Your Grace." Nathaniel barely looked up. "Leave it there." Harrison hesitated. "You have not touched yesterday's letters." Nathaniel glanced toward the untouched stack. "No." "Nor the business reports." "No." Harrison studied him carefully. "You appear distracted." Nathaniel laughed once. A short, humorless sound. A remarkable observation. The valet wisely chose silence. After several moments, he placed the correspondence on the desk and withdrew. Nathaniel remained motionless. Then his gaze drifted toward the old document spread across the far end of the desk. The mysterious crest. The letters. The records belonging to his late father. Over the previous 2 nights he had examined them repeatedly. Most revealed nothing. One document, however, refused to leave his thoughts. He crossed the room and picked it up again. A partnership agreement dated 23 years earlier. 2 signatures appeared at the bottom. One belonged to his father. The other belonged to Lord Fairchild. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. He had seen the names before. Yet something about the arrangement bothered him. A notation appeared in the margin. Brief. Easily overlooked. Debt satisfied through private transfer. He stared at the words. Then at the partially visible crest stamped near the bottom corner. The same crest. His pulse quickened. For the first time, a genuine lead had emerged. Unfortunately, the one person who needed to see it was halfway to Cornwall. By the second day of travel, Rosalind found herself surrounded by an entirely different world. London's crowded streets had given way to rolling countryside. Stone villages appeared and disappeared beyond the carriage windows. Green fields stretched toward distant horizons. The air smelled cleaner. Fresher. Yet peace remained frustratingly elusive. She spent much of the journey reading. When reading failed, she watched the landscape. When that failed, she found herself thinking. Mostly about mysteries she could not solve and a duke she was trying very hard not to miss. The latter effort proved unsuccessful. On the evening of the 3rd day, she finally arrived at the coastal cottage. The house stood atop a low bluff overlooking the sea. White walls glowed softly beneath the fading light. Waves crashed gently against dark rocks below. The familiar sight loosened something inside her chest. Home. Not her primary home. Yet a place filled with childhood memories. Simplicity. Quiet. Exactly what she needed. Or so she hoped. The following morning brought sunshine. The second brought rain. By the 4th day, Rosalind began settling into a routine. Long walks along the cliffs. Reading beside open windows. Correspondence with family. Gradually, the constant pressure of London's gossip started to fade. Yet one thing refused to disappear. The unanswered questions. Every evening she unlocked the small box containing the anonymous letters. Every evening she reread them. Every evening the mystery seemed larger than before. On the 6th day after her arrival, another letter reached Cornwall. This one bore Catherine's familiar handwriting. Rosalind smiled immediately while opening it. The smile vanished halfway through the 2nd page. London remains obsessed with the scandal. Lady Victoria Hawthorne appears particularly interested. Mother suspects she knows more than she admits. Also, West Haven has become impossible. Theodore claims he spends every waking hour buried in old family records. No one understands why. Rosalind stared at the words. West Haven has become impossible. Despite herself, she laughed softly. The description felt surprisingly accurate. Yet another sentence lingered. Lady Victoria Hawthorne appears particularly interested. Rosalind folded the letter thoughtfully. A memory surfaced. Victoria's expression at the garden gathering. The coldness hidden beneath polite smiles. The observation settled uncomfortably. Could Victoria be connected? The possibility seemed improbable. Yet not impossible. Meanwhile, back in London, Nathaniel sat alone inside the archives room at West Haven House. Dusty ledgers surrounded him. Account books towered in precarious stacks. Candlelight flickered across shelves untouched for years. He had spent nearly a week examining records. Most people would have surrendered by now. Nathaniel was not most people. Theodore appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look worse. Nathaniel accepted the cup. You said that already. It remains true. Theodore glanced around the room. Have you discovered anything? Nathaniel handed over the partnership agreement. Theodore read quickly. Then his expression changed. Good God. Exactly. Your father and Lord Fairchild conducted business together. Apparently. Theodore reread the notation. Debt satisfied through private transfer. Silence followed. Theodore looked up. What does it mean? Nathaniel stared toward the rain-darkened windows. I do not know. Yet. Nathaniel nodded. Yet. Another long silence settled between them. Finally Theodore spoke. You miss her. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Any other day he would have denied it. Today he lacked the energy. Yes. The admission felt strangely relieving. Theodore smiled faintly. About time. Nathaniel ignored him. Yet after Theodore departed, he remained seated in silence for a very long while. Outside, London continued its endless motion. Inside, one truth had become impossible to avoid. Rosalind's absence echoed through every part of his life. Social gatherings felt empty. Conversations felt incomplete. Even victory seemed strangely meaningless. He had spent years believing affection weakened judgment. Now he discovered the opposite. Losing someone important sharpened every realization. And the sharpest realization of all arrived shortly before midnight as he stared at the old documents spread across his desk. The wager had never truly been about resisting Rosalind. The wager had been about protecting his pride. Pride was now the least important thing in his life. Thousands of miles away along the Cornish coast, Rosalind stood at the edge of a cliff watching moonlight dance across the ocean. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Below, waves rolled endlessly toward shore. For the first time since leaving London, she felt calm. Not happy. Not healed. Simply calmer. Then a rider appeared on the distant road leading toward the cottage. Even from this distance she could see the horse moving quickly. Purposefully. Her brow furrowed. Visitors were rare. Urgent visitors rarer still. Minutes later, the rider reached the gate. Rosalind recognized the messenger's uniform immediately. London Post. Her pulse quickened. A sealed envelope changed hands. The messenger departed almost at once. Rosalind accepted the letter and stared at the familiar handwriting on the front. Nathaniel Blackthorne. For several seconds she simply stood there beneath the moonlit sky, unable to move. Then, slowly, she broke the seal. Inside waited only 3 sentences. I found the crest. I found the connection between our fathers. You are in far more danger than either of us realized. Rosalind read the letter 3 times before she trusted herself to breathe normally again. The moonlit cliffs around her seemed to vanish. The distant crash of waves disappeared beneath the thunder of her own thoughts. I found the crest. I found the connection between our fathers. You are in far more danger than either of us realized. The message contained no explanation. No details. No evidence. Only urgency. She hated it immediately. By the time she reached the cottage, the paper had already become creased from being folded and unfolded repeatedly. Mrs. Turner, the elderly housekeeper who had cared for the property for nearly 2 decades, noticed her expression the moment she entered. "Bad news, miss." Rosalind hesitated. "I am not sure." "That sounds worse than bad news." Unfortunately, the woman was correct. Rosalind retired to the small study overlooking the sea and lit several additional candles. The room glowed warmly despite the growing darkness outside. She placed Nathaniel's letter beside the anonymous notes and studied them together. For the first time, all 3 seemed connected by something larger than simple gossip. Someone had orchestrated every step carefully. The letters. The scandal. The crest. The references to her father. Yet why? The question remained maddeningly unanswered. Sleep proved impossible. Before dawn, she sat beside the window watching pale light emerge across the horizon. By breakfast, she had reached a decision. She would write back immediately. The letter was brief. "What danger? What did you discover? Explain everything." She sealed it within minutes and dispatched it through the fastest courier available. Then came the waiting. Waiting, she discovered, was intolerable. 3 days later another letter arrived. This one was considerably longer. Rosalind carried it directly to the study before breaking the seal. Nathaniel's handwriting appeared steady and controlled across several pages. Yet she sensed urgency beneath every line. He explained that the crest belonged to a dissolved investment consortium formed nearly 25 years earlier. Several powerful families had participated. Among them were Lord Fairchild and the former Duke of West Haven. The venture had eventually collapsed after one member disappeared with a substantial portion of the group's assets. The resulting financial damage affected multiple families. Some recovered. Others did not. Rosalind read slowly. Her father's name appeared repeatedly throughout the account. Then she reached the passage that changed everything. According to the surviving records, Lord Fairchild had personally prevented the complete ruin of the West Haven estate. Using his own resources, he had covered obligations that would otherwise have destroyed Nathaniel's family financially. Rosalind lowered the pages. Her father had saved West Haven? The revelation felt impossible. Yet it explained the notation Nathaniel had discovered. Debt satisfied through private transfer. She continued reading. Several years later, however, Lord Fairchild's own fortunes declined. The reasons remained unclear. Records disappeared. Transactions vanished. Entire portions of the story seemed deliberately erased. Nathaniel's final paragraph disturbed her most. Someone wanted these facts hidden. The anonymous letters prove it. I believe whoever orchestrated the scandal is connected to the missing records. More importantly, I believe your father paid a price for protecting mine. Rosalind stared at the page long after finishing. The room seemed strangely silent. Every assumption she had carried about her family suddenly felt incomplete. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Turner entered carrying tea. Another letter from London. Rosalind nodded. Family business. The explanation sounded inadequate even to her own ears. Once alone again, she reread the documents carefully. Then another realization emerged. If Nathaniel was correct, the scandal might never have been about romance at all. It might have been designed to distract them from discovering the truth. The possibility sent a chill through her. Late that afternoon she decided to visit the village church. The small stone building stood less than a mile from the cottage. More importantly, its records occasionally contained information unavailable elsewhere. Her father had spent several summers in Cornwall during his youth. Perhaps something remained. The walk provided welcome distraction. Sea air carried the scent of salt and wildflowers. Gulls circled overhead. The sky stretched brilliantly blue above the cliffs. For the first time in days, Rosalind felt purposeful rather than helpless. Reverend Collins greeted her warmly. "Miss Fairchild." "Good afternoon, Reverend. What brings you here?" Rosalind smiled. "Curiosity." The elderly minister laughed. "A dangerous reason. So I am discovering." He guided her toward a modest archive room behind the chapel. Shelves contained decades of local records. Most proved irrelevant. Yet after nearly 2 hours of searching, Rosalind found something unexpected. A visitor registry dated 22 years earlier. She turned pages slowly, then froze. 2 names appeared side by side. Lord Fairchild, Duke of Westhaven. The entry recorded a private meeting held during the same summer Nathaniel's documents referenced. Rosalind's pulse quickened. They had come to Cornwall together. Why? Before she could investigate further, another detail caught her attention. A third name appeared beneath theirs. Lady Victoria Ashcombe. Rosalind sat perfectly still. Ashcombe. The maiden name. Lady Victoria Hawthorne. The room seemed to narrow around her. Coincidence was possible. Yet the timing felt suspicious. Very suspicious. Back in London, Nathaniel arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion. He stood inside the archives room at Westhaven House examining correspondence recovered from a forgotten storage chest. Theodore sat nearby reviewing separate records. Both men had spent days chasing fragments. Finally, the fragments were beginning to align. "You are not going to enjoy this," Theodore said quietly. Nathaniel looked up. Theodore handed him a letter. The handwriting belonged to Lady Victoria's late father. Nathaniel read quickly. Then again. The contents referenced financial losses suffered after the collapse of the consortium. Resentment lingered between every line. One sentence drew immediate attention. Some families prosper from sacrifice while others are expected to bear the cost in silence. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Theodore noticed. Exactly. The Hawthorne family was involved. Yes. Theodore folded his arms. And based on these dates, Victoria knew many of the participants personally through her father. Nathaniel stared toward the window. Rain streaked the glass. The pieces finally fit together. Not perfectly, but enough. The letters. The manipulation. The careful timing. Victoria possessed motive, access, and knowledge. What she lacked was proof. Nathaniel intended to find it. The next morning, another problem emerged. Harrison entered his study carrying a stack of correspondence. His normally calm expression looked troubled. "Your Grace." Nathaniel glanced up. "What is it?" Harrison handed over a document. Nathaniel read quickly. His jaw tightened. Then tightened further. Where did this come from? A banking firm in London. Theodore rose immediately. What happened? Nathaniel tossed him the paper. Theodore's expression darkened. Someone had initiated inquiries into remaining Fairchild holdings. Not illegal inquiries. Not even unusual ones. Yet the timing was deeply suspicious. Certain financial arrangements connected to Rosalind's family were suddenly attracting attention from individuals who had no reason to be involved. They are pressuring her family, Theodore said. Nathaniel nodded slowly. Or preparing to. Silence settled over the room. Then Nathaniel made a decision. Arrange a carriage. Theodore blinked. Where are you going? Nathaniel looked toward the sea-facing horizon beyond the rain. Toward Cornwall. Toward Rosalind. Toward answers. I have spent weeks examining records. His voice remained calm. Dangerous in its calmness. I am finished waiting for documents to solve this. Theodore almost smiled. About time. 2 days later, Rosalind stood once again on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The wind tugged gently at her cloak while afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water below. She carried copies of every note and every record she had uncovered. The mystery was finally beginning to reveal itself. Yet questions remained. Too many questions. A distant sound interrupted her thoughts. Hoofbeats. Fast. Determined. She turned toward the coastal road. A lone rider appeared beyond the rise overlooking the cottage. At first the figure seemed unfamiliar. Then recognition struck with startling force. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark coat. Nathaniel Blackthorne. Her breath caught. The horse closed the distance rapidly. Within moments he reached the gate below. Their eyes met across the windswept hillside. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Yet in that instant Rosalind understood two things with perfect clarity. First, the mystery had become far larger than either of them expected. Second, despite every reason she had given herself to stay angry, seeing him again felt dangerously like coming home. Nathaniel dismounted before the stable boy could reach him. The journey from London to Cornwall had been exhausting. Dust clung to his coat. Fatigue shadowed his face. Yet the moment he saw Rosalind standing above the cliffs, none of that seemed to matter. For several seconds neither moved. The sea stretched endlessly behind her. Wind lifted strands of chestnut hair from beneath her bonnet. The late afternoon sunlight painted the coastline in gold. Nathaniel realized with uncomfortable clarity that no amount of distance had diminished his awareness of her. If anything, absence had sharpened it. Rosalind descended the narrow path slowly. By the time she reached the gate, he had removed his gloves and handed his horse to a groom. Suddenly all the speeches he had prepared during the journey felt inadequate. Miss Fairchild. The formality sounded absurd after everything that had happened. Rosalind folded her hands together. Your Grace. The matching formality felt equally absurd. Yet neither seemed ready to surrender it. Silence followed. Not hostile. Simply uncertain. Nathaniel studied her carefully. She looked healthier than she had during those final days in London. The strain around her eyes had eased. The sea air appeared to suit her. Strangely, that realization made him both relieved and miserable. Relieved because she seemed happier. Miserable because she had achieved that happiness far away from him. You traveled a considerable distance, she said at last. I did. Why? Direct. Honest. Entirely Rosalind. Nathaniel almost smiled. Because letters became insufficient. Her expression softened slightly before returning to caution. That is not an explanation. No. He looked toward the ocean. Then back at her. It is the truth. For a brief moment neither spoke. Finally Rosalind stepped aside. You should come inside before Mrs. Turner decides you require rescuing. The invitation was modest. Yet Nathaniel felt irrationally grateful for it. The cottage proved exactly as he imagined. Comfortable. Warm. Filled with books and sea light. Nothing about it resembled the grandeur of London's aristocratic houses. That was precisely why he liked it immediately. Mrs. Turner greeted him politely and within minutes ensured tea appeared before either guest had the opportunity to object. Once they were alone in the study overlooking the sea, formality finally began to fade. Documents soon covered the desk between them. Letters. Registry entries. Financial records. Notes gathered from archives scattered across England. Nathaniel reviewed Rosalind's discoveries while she examined his. Every few minutes another piece aligned. Another connection emerged. The mystery that had seemed impossible only weeks earlier was finally taking shape. Victoria's father lost heavily after the consortium collapsed, Nathaniel said. Rosalind nodded. The church registry places him in Cornwall during the same period as our father's. And several financial records disappeared shortly afterward. Rosalind leaned back in her chair. Someone spent years burying evidence. Nathaniel studied her. Not someone. A family. The realization settled heavily between them. Outside, waves crashed against distant rocks. Inside, the truth slowly emerged. Lord Fairchild had used much of his own fortune protecting several families from financial ruin after the consortium collapsed. Among them was West Haven. Yet instead of gratitude, resentment followed. Some participants blamed him for decisions he had never made. Others resented the influence he gained through acts of generosity. Over time, rumors replaced facts. Resentment became inheritance. "My father never spoke about any of this," Rosalind said quietly. "Neither did mine." Nathaniel folded one of the letters. Perhaps they hoped the past would remain buried. Instead it waited. Their eyes met. Nathaniel found himself watching her rather than the documents. He had been doing that increasingly often. The realization no longer surprised him. It merely terrified him. Evening arrived gradually. The study darkened. Lamps were lit. Tea became dinner. Still neither seemed eager to stop talking. Eventually the conversation drifted beyond family history. They discussed Cornwall. Books. Childhood memories. Small things. Ordinary things. The sort of things people shared when they genuinely enjoyed one another's company. Hours passed unnoticed. At some point Rosalind laughed. A real laugh. Unrestrained. Nathaniel felt something inside his chest tighten unexpectedly. He had missed that sound. More than he should have. Much more. The realization followed him long after dinner ended. Later that night, after Rosalind retired upstairs, Nathaniel remained alone in the study. Moonlight shimmered across the ocean beyond the windows. The cottage had fallen silent. Yet his thoughts refused to cooperate. For weeks he had attempted to treat this situation as a mystery requiring investigation. A problem requiring a solution. A scandal requiring correction. The truth was far less convenient. He missed her. He worried about her. He thought about her constantly. Every attempt to dismiss those facts had failed. Theodore had recognized it long before he did. So had Catherine. Possibly half of London. Nathaniel laughed softly at the thought. The sound held no amusement. Only resignation. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Turner appeared in the doorway. "Still awake, Your Grace." Unfortunately. The elderly housekeeper smiled knowingly. Miss Fairchild inherited that habit from her father. Nathaniel looked up. Working late. Thinking too much. Mrs. Turner nodded. That as well. She hesitated. Then added, "You look happier than when you arrived." Nathaniel considered denying it. Somehow he lacked the energy. Perhaps. Good. She smiled. She has looked happier too. After she departed, silence returned. Yet her words lingered. She has looked happier too. Nathaniel stared out at the moonlit sea. Then at the documents scattered across the desk. Somewhere along the way, the mystery had ceased being the most important part of this journey. The realization arrived with startling force. He loved her. The truth appeared so suddenly, so clearly, that denial became impossible. Not admiration. Not friendship. Not fascination. Love. Deep. Complete. Unavoidable. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. For years he had trusted discipline above emotion. Logic above impulse. Control above vulnerability. Now all three had abandoned him. And the most astonishing part was that he no longer wished them back. The next morning brought another revelation. A messenger arrived shortly after breakfast carrying correspondence from London. Theodore's handwriting covered the outside of the envelope. Nathaniel opened it immediately. His expression changed before he reached the second page. Rosalind noticed at once. "What is it?" Nathaniel handed over the letter. She read quickly. Then again. Her stomach tightened. Theodore had found proof. Actual proof. Financial records connected directly to Victoria's family. Documents demonstrating years of carefully orchestrated manipulation. Not enough for legal consequences. More than enough for social exposure. The evidence could destroy reputations. Good heavens. Nathaniel nodded. Exactly. Rosalind looked up. What happens now? Nathaniel's answer came immediately. We return to London. The word settled heavily between them. London. The city they had both fled in different ways. The city where the scandal began. The city where the truth must finally be revealed. Neither looked particularly enthusiastic. Yet both understood the necessity. Rosalind folded Theodore's letter carefully. Then we leave tomorrow. Nathaniel nodded. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Merely thoughtful. The future suddenly felt very close. So did the inevitable confrontation waiting for them. Yet beneath every concern, another realization quietly remained. They were no longer facing any of it alone. And for Nathaniel Blackthorne, that mattered more than any mystery ever could. London seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened. That was the first thing Rosalind noticed upon her return. The city remained exactly as she remembered. Elegant carriages rolled through Mayfair. Ladies attended afternoon calls. Gentlemen discussed politics, investments, and horse racing with equal seriousness. The season continued beneath chandeliers and polished smiles. Yet beneath the familiar surface, tension waited. Rumors had not disappeared. They had merely changed shape. The journey from Cornwall lasted several days. During that time, Nathaniel and Rosalind spent long hours reviewing Theodore's findings. Every document strengthened their position. Every record reinforced the truth. By the time they arrived in London, neither doubted what had happened. The only remaining question was how to reveal it. Theodore greeted them at Westhaven House within an hour of their arrival. You both look exhausted. Nathaniel handed him a stack of papers. That is because we have been travelling. Theodore glanced toward Rosalind. You look less angry. Rosalind almost smiled. That is because I have been travelling. Theodore laughed. The sound briefly eased the tension filling the room. Then business resumed. Documents covered the large table in Nathaniel's study. Financial records. Correspondence. Registry entries. Notes gathered from multiple archives. Together they created a picture that could no longer be ignored. Lord Fairchild had sacrificed much of his own fortune protecting several aristocratic families after the consortium collapsed. The Hawthorne family suffered significant losses despite those efforts. Over the years, resentment evolved into bitterness. After inheriting both influence and grievance, Victoria had quietly nurtured the belief that her family had been unfairly treated. The anonymous letters. The missing records. The carefully timed scandal. All pointed toward one conclusion. Victoria had spent years attempting to reshape the story. Rosalind stared down at the evidence. It seems so unnecessary. Theodore nodded. Most grudges become unnecessary long before people abandon them. Nathaniel folded one of the letters. What matters now is ending it. Silence followed. Everyone understood what that meant. Exposure. Public exposure. Anything less would leave room for rumors. London respected only one form of truth. The kind delivered before witnesses. 2 evenings later, opportunity arrived. Lady Weatherby announced the largest ball of the season. Nearly every important family in London planned to attend. By noon, invitations had become the only topic of conversation in half the city. Theodore immediately recognized the significance. This is it. Nathaniel looked toward the window. Yes. Rosalind remained quiet. The prospect of returning to a ballroom filled with gossip held little appeal. Yet she understood the necessity. Some stories required endings witnessed by everyone. The evening arrived beneath clear skies. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated Lady Weatherby's townhouse. Music drifted through open windows. Carriages crowded the street outside. The event possessed all the grandeur expected of London's highest society. Rosalind stood before a mirror in Fairchild House while Catherine adjusted a final ribbon. "You look beautiful." Rosalind smiled faintly. "You are required by law to say that." "Absolutely not." Catherine stepped back. "I am saying it because it is true." Lady Fairchild approached and kissed her daughter's cheek. Pride shone unmistakably in her eyes. "Your father would have been proud of you tonight." Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside Rosalind's chest. She squeezed her mother's hand. No further words seemed necessary. Across London, Nathaniel prepared with considerably less assistance. Harrison handed him his coat. "You appear nervous." Nathaniel adjusted his cuffs. "I am not nervous." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Of course." Nathaniel sighed. "You have become very impertinent." "Years of employment, Your Grace." Despite himself, Nathaniel laughed. Yet once alone, the nervousness returned. Not because of the evidence. Not because of Victoria. Not because of London. Rosalind remained the source of every uncertainty he could no longer control. The realization followed him all the way to Lady Weatherby's ballroom. The crowd was enormous. Crystal chandeliers flooded the room with light. Conversation echoed across marble floors. Aristocrats filled every corner of the house. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. News had already spread that both Rosalind Fairchild and the Duke of Westhaven would attend. Society expected drama. Society was correct. Rosalind entered with her mother shortly after 9 o'clock. Heads turned immediately. Whispers followed. Yet something felt different this time. She no longer wanted to disappear. Cornwall had changed her. The truth had changed her. She crossed the ballroom with calm dignity and greeted acquaintances politely. Several offered cautious smiles. Others appeared uncertain. The scandal still lingered. Yet tonight she found herself less afraid of it. Then Nathaniel entered. The effect on the room was immediate. Conversation softened. Attention shifted. Even among aristocrats, some people possessed undeniable presence. Nathaniel was one of them. Their eyes met almost instantly. Across the crowded ballroom, the noise seemed to fade. Neither smiled. Neither waved. Yet Rosalind felt a strange steadiness settle inside her. She was no longer facing this alone. Nearby, Lady Victoria Hawthorne watched the exchange carefully. For the first time all evening, uncertainty touched her expression. Something about Nathaniel's demeanor troubled her. He looked too calm. Too certain. The orchestra finished one dance and began another. Guests moved across the floor. Minutes passed. Then Nathaniel crossed the ballroom. Every step seemed deliberate. Conversations gradually slowed as people noticed his destination. Rosalind remained perfectly still while he approached. "Miss Fairchild." "Your Grace." Formal words. Familiar words. Yet something powerful moved beneath them. Nathaniel extended his arm. "Would you honor me with this dance?" Hundreds of eyes seemed to focus upon them. Rosalind understood the significance immediately. So did everyone else. After a brief pause, she placed her hand lightly upon his arm. "Yes." A murmur swept through the room. Together they moved toward the center of the ballroom. The orchestra began a waltz. Silence gradually spread. Not complete silence. Merely the unusual quiet that appears when society senses something important approaching. Nathaniel guided her through the first movement with effortless confidence. Rosalind recognized it immediately. He had made a decision. Whatever happened next, he intended to face it publicly. "You are about to do something reckless," she said softly. Nathaniel almost smiled. "Probably." "That is not reassuring." "No." His gaze held hers. "But it is honest." They completed another turn around the ballroom. More people were watching now. Many had stopped pretending otherwise. Near the far wall, Theodore stood beside Catherine and looked suspiciously pleased with himself. Victoria appeared considerably less pleased. The music continued. Nathaniel's expression grew serious. Rosalind. The use of her given name stole her attention instantly. Yes? For a moment he said nothing. The ballroom seemed to disappear around them. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know something. Her heart began beating faster. Nathaniel. No. His voice remained steady. Certain. Not yet. Confusion flickered through her. Yet before she could question him further, the music ended. Applause followed. Then silence returned. Nathaniel released her hand. Not completely. Just enough to turn toward the watching crowd. Every conversation stopped. Every eye focused upon him. Even the musician seemed uncertain whether to continue. Nathaniel looked around the ballroom. Then he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen. The room became utterly silent. Rosalind felt her pulse quicken. Across the ballroom, Victoria's face lost color. Theodore folded his arms. Catherine looked moments away from cheering. Nathaniel's voice carried clearly through the vast room. Calm. Controlled. Powerful. Several weeks ago, London became fascinated by a story involving Miss Fairchild and myself. No one moved. No one interrupted. Tonight I intend to discuss that story publicly. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Rosalind stared at him. He did not look away. Because the story London received was incomplete. Silence deepened. Somewhere in the room, a glass clinked softly against silver. Then even that sound vanished. Nathaniel reached inside his coat and withdrew several documents. The evidence. The truth. The beginning of the end. And as every aristocrat in London watched, the Duke of Westhaven prepared to reveal everything. The silence inside Lady Weatherby's ballroom felt almost unreal. Hundreds of guests stood motionless beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Conversations had vanished. Music had stopped. Even the servants seemed reluctant to move. Every eye remained fixed upon Nathaniel Blackthorne. He stood at the center of the room with the confidence expected of a duke. Yet Rosalind knew him well enough now to recognize something deeper beneath that composure. Determination. Absolute and unwavering. Nathaniel unfolded the first document. His voice carried clearly across the ballroom. Several weeks ago, a story began circulating throughout London. Many of you heard it. Most of you repeated it. Some of you enjoyed it. Uneasy expressions appeared throughout the crowd. No one interrupted. That story suggested Miss Fairchild became the subject of a wager. Unfortunately, that portion of the story is true. A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Rosalind felt her pulse quicken. Nathaniel continued before anyone could react. The conclusion people drew from that wager, however, was entirely false. His gaze swept across the assembled aristocracy. Miss Fairchild was treated unfairly because of my arrogance. She was judged without understanding the facts. Worse, she was forced to endure ridicule she did not deserve. Several guests looked away. Others shifted awkwardly. Nathaniel held up one of the records. During the past several weeks, evidence has come to light regarding a series of events that began more than 20 years ago. He briefly explained the consortium. The financial collapse. The missing records. The sacrifices made by Lord Fairchild. One by one, Theodore distributed copies of key documents among several respected members of society. Men known for their integrity. Women whose influence shaped half of London's opinion. They reviewed the evidence carefully. Silence deepened with every passing moment. Nathaniel spoke again. Lord Fairchild protected multiple families from ruin. Including my own. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Shock appeared on many faces. Rosalind saw Lady Fairchild close her eyes briefly. Emotion flickered across her features. Nearby, Catherine looked openly proud. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. Instead of gratitude, false narratives emerged. Records disappeared. Resentment survived long after the truth was forgotten. His gaze shifted toward the far side of the ballroom. Toward Victoria. The movement was subtle. Yet everyone noticed. Victoria stood perfectly still. The color had drained from her face. Recent events were not random, Nathaniel continued. Anonymous letters were sent. Evidence was concealed. A scandal was encouraged. All with the intention of damaging Miss Fairchild and preventing the truth from emerging. No accusation followed. None was necessary. The documents spoke for themselves. Theodore quietly presented additional records. Several influential guests examined them. Expressions changed. Understanding spread. Then came the moment Rosalind would remember for the rest of her life. Nathaniel folded the final document and handed it away. The mystery had been explained. The evidence presented. The truth revealed. He could have stopped there. Society certainly expected him to. Instead, he turned toward her. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Rosalind felt it. Every person in the room sensed something significant approaching. Nathaniel took a single step closer. Then another. His eyes never left hers. There is one final matter I must address. No one moved. No one spoke. The wager. A faint murmur passed through the crowd. Nathaniel ignored it. When the story spread through London, people learned part of what happened. His voice softened slightly. Not all of it. Rosalind's heart began racing. Nathaniel looked directly at her. Every word that followed belonged to her alone, despite the audience surrounding them. Several weeks ago, I told my friends I could spend an entire season in Miss Fairchild's company and remain entirely unaffected. A few embarrassed faces appeared throughout the ballroom. Nathaniel continued. At the time, I believed it. A faint smile touched his lips. Not amused. Self-aware. I was wrong. Complete silence followed. The sort of silence people remember years later. Nathaniel drew a slow breath. Then he said the words Rosalind would never forget. I did not remain unaffected for a season. His gaze never wavered. I failed after 14 days. Gasps echoed softly throughout the room. Theodore closed his eyes as though savoring victory. Catherine immediately burst into tears. Lady Fairchild covered her mouth. Rosalind simply stared. Nathaniel took another step forward. The distance between them disappeared. The wager was real. His voice remained calm. Honest. So is my regret. Emotion flickered briefly across his face. I hurt you. Rosalind felt tears gathering despite every effort to stop them. Nathaniel continued. I embarrassed you. I disappointed you. I gave society an excuse to treat you unfairly. For a moment his composure almost cracked. Those failures belong to me. No one in the room looked away. But there is something else that belongs to me as well. His eyes softened. The certainty that I love you. The word settled over the ballroom like sunlight after a storm. Simple. Direct. Unmistakable. Rosalind could no longer hear anything except her own heartbeat. Nathaniel's voice lowered. I love your courage. Another step closer. I love your intelligence. Closer still. I love your kindness. Emotion tightened visibly in his throat. And I love the way you challenge every assumption I ever made about myself. Tears escaped despite Rosalind's determination. She no longer cared. Nathaniel smiled gently. You once asked why I kept protecting you. A brief pause followed. The truth is that I stopped thinking of it as protection a very long time ago. It simply felt impossible to stand aside while someone extraordinary was treated unfairly. The ballroom remained silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to listen. Then, before the astonished gaze of London's highest society, Nathaniel Blackthorne did something no one expected. The Duke of Westhaven lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Rosalind's hand flew to her mouth. Nathaniel looked up at her. Not as a duke. Not as one of the most powerful men in England. Simply as a man in love. Rosalind Fairchild. His voice was steady despite the emotion shining clearly in his eyes. I cannot change the mistake that brought us here. A faint smile appeared. I would if I could. Soft laughter trembled through the room. Nathaniel continued. But I can spend the rest of my life proving that you deserved far better than my pride. He reached into his coat and produced a small velvet box. Will you marry me? The world seemed to stop. Rosalind saw nothing except him. The man who had begun as a frustration. Then a mystery. Then a friend. Then something infinitely more important. She remembered the letters. The scandal. The journey to Cornwall. The hours spent uncovering the truth together. She remembered every apology. Every act of protection. Every moment he chose honesty over pride. Most of all, she remembered the man who crossed England because letters were no longer enough. Tears blurred her vision completely. She laughed softly through them. Nathaniel. He looked momentarily terrified. The sight nearly broke her heart. Yes? The entire ballroom waited. Rosalind smiled. You are impossible. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel's expression became uncertain. I have been told that before. Frequently, I imagine. More laughter followed. Then Rosalind's smile softened. Fortunately. Her voice trembled. I love you too. For one heartbeat, absolute silence returned. Then the ballroom erupted. Applause thundered through the room. Cheers followed. Even the musicians appeared delighted. Catherine openly wept against Theodore's shoulder. Lady Fairchild cried without the slightest attempt at dignity. Nathaniel rose slowly. Relief and joy transformed his face completely. Rosalind had never seen him smile like that. She suspected no one had. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then, with every witness in London watching, he kissed her hand reverently. The gesture felt somehow more intimate than any grand declaration. Around them, society's opinion shifted completely. The woman once pitied became the woman admired. The family once questioned became the family honored. Truth had prevailed. Justice had arrived. Later that evening, long after the music resumed and conversations returned, Rosalind stood beside an open window overlooking the moonlit gardens. Nathaniel joined her quietly. For a while neither spoke. The moment required no words. Finally Nathaniel glanced toward her. Do you know something? What? He smiled. Theodore still owes £500 to the Veterans' Hospital. Rosalind laughed. The sound carried softly into the night. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. 14 days. What about them? His smile deepened. That is all it took. Rosalind slipped her hand into his. For what? Nathaniel looked toward the ballroom filled with laughter, music, and people who finally understood the truth. Then he looked back at the woman who had changed everything. For me to lose. Rosalind smiled. No. She squeezed his hand gently. For both of us to win. And beneath the golden light of a London ballroom, surrounded by truth, forgiveness, and the promise of a future built on both, that was exactly what they did.